Now, how will you verify that new or old legislation is in fact the will of the majority of people? If you don't use referenda, initiative, and plebiscites, how would you find out that the majority of people want or don't want certain legislation?
I'm not comfortable with a majority.
Okay.
What I'm comfortable with is finding consensus. A majority means 50% plus one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we see in California. So in California, when they were looking at banning GMOs or labeling GMOs, right? Huge amounts of private industry money, people like Monsanto that have a vested interest in making sure people don't know there are GMOs in their food, because they know if they did know, that people would not buy that food. So they invested a huge amount of money, and they just won the referendum. They rejected labeling of GMOs. That's the problem with referendums. It is, yes, a majority, 50% plus one, but it doesn't represent a broadly based consensus of people. So
how do you find out that the broadly consensus?
Well, you bring these are the issues that are coming to our legislature. What do you think? Let's come together. Let's find a strategy for how we could improve this.
You mean you discuss with other MLAs?
No,
but how do you
I'm talking about going to the people, a broadly based consensus, a representative base of people in Victoria Beacon Hill.
And then how do you know what is the consensus of the majority of the people?
Because you use strategies to develop that consensus.
For instance, what are strategies?
Well, there's things like nominal group tactics, where you could have a group of 1,000 people or 2,000 people or 3,000 people, and you could say, these are the issues, let's talk about it, let's prioritize it, let's find what everybody thinks, let's get it posted on a wall, let's find the categories, and then let's prioritize them. There's all kinds of methodologies where you could engage people in such an active way that you could find out what the true majority, 80 or 90% of the people, actually feel about something.
But how do you find that true majority? Do you count? Do you come to a vote?
You come to a consensus. It's not a
consensus, not a vote?
It's not a vote. It's not a yes or no thing. It's a multiple opportunity to flesh out what it is that we're dealing with, and to then come together as a group and say, okay, based on all of this discussion that we've had, this is what we believe.
Now, when you have this consensus making, you have people talking to you and telling you, this is what we think. We agree with it, whatever the issue is, or we don't agree with it. You want to paint the Blue Bridge green or orange or other color than blue. How do you make that consensus? How do you come to the final decision that in fact the majority of people want to do it one color or another color? If you don't have a referendum, how do you come to that consensus?
Again, it's just talking with the people, making sure that you hear all the voices. And I mean, if there's a 30% want green and 30% yellow, 30% red, then maybe you say, this is important enough, I have to have a referendum, but you got to let them know there's a cost to referendums.
How do you get to that 30%? You say 30% agree at one side, another 30% you have triple. To get that 30%, you must have had some plebiscite.
Not necessarily. I think just engagement. I mean, we talk all the time. There's social media, emails. Everyone is available all the time. So if there was an issue, and let's say it was the color of the bridge, that issue could be put out and people can respond. We do it through media as we do now. We do it through Facebooks, emails, Twitters. People can get their views, and that would give you an idea where we're going. And I think the first thing is, how passionate are people? If this is really important to people, then we take it to another step and we engage the people to see what's going going, and if we have to have a referendum and the people want it and are willing to pay for it, because as taxpayers we will all pay for that referendum, then we'll take it to that. But I think it has to be important, and we have to trust our elected representatives to do the right thing because they voted for you.
Okay. How do you quantify the will of the people?
That is a difficult question, and until the internet became widespread, it was almost impossible to do that. And to some extent, we're not going to get full participation from the electorate on every issue. But what's most important is that an MLA be able to say that people have been given more than one opportunity in more than one channel to make their voices heard, that they were informed about the opportunity to have their voice, and that as many people as possible did participate.
Now, to find out what the majority want, we cannot just say, well, I hear their voices, because you can hear any voices. There are people that hear spiritual voices. But we have to actually have a number, a solid number, say 75% oppose this legislation, for instance. But that 75% comes from a poll or from a referendum or from a plebiscite. If you don't have that, how can you say, yeah, I'm doing what the majority of people want?
Well, in my riding, for example, there are approximately 40,000 voters. That's a nice round number. Now, if I as an MLA have, in the course of a year, communicated with or heard from or interacted with in some way 2,000 to 5,000 of them, and I've heard different voices, and I'm looking at the breakdown of the people I've communicated with. Have I communicated with low-income families? Have I heard from business owners? I know the demographic breakdown of my riding, and it's my job to be able to prove, not just to think, but to actually prove that I have heard the voices and interacted with people of all kinds of different backgrounds. There may be, there's about 2,000 single-parent families. So, have I heard from 20 of them?
Yeah. How can you prove that is
well,
what you hear?
You have to keep records.
Okay, so those records are like polls, are like a referendum, are like a plebiscite.
Yeah, or just a note of my communications.
Okay,
who have I talked to?
The note you're counting.
Yeah.
Okay, so how will you verify that in fact elections or referendums are in fact the voice of the majority? How can you quantify it if you don't count?
Well, I think a couple of ways. I think one is engaging in the community on an ongoing basis, not simply at election time. Elections are obviously decided by majority, then you're in, but you need to make sure that you're checking back. I take my role very seriously after I'm elected. I represent everyone in our community, regardless of whether they voted, regardless of whether they're my political party or they supported me or not. My job is to represent everyone. And so you need to make sure that as an MLA, and I do this, to take the time to go out in the communities, to engage with groups and organizations, to make sure you have the pulse of what's going on in your community.
Right, to listen.
To listen, exactly,
listen,
and to learn.
But to take the pulse, when you take a pulse, you count how many beats per second. And it's counting. So you want to do the will of the people. How will you know that that is the will of the people if you don't have a referendum?
Well, one of the things I do is door knocking, for sure. Being in contact with people helps me understand what's going on, and just making sure I'm available for anybody's concerns.
Yeah. So you want people to come and talk to you, or you go to the doors and knock. But how do you gauge that? How do you know that the majority of people want yellow or green or blue to be the house painted?
Right.
You see, how do you gauge that? Just knocking doors, you can have a general idea, but unless you tabulate it, unless you count it, which is what referendums do, then you don't really know what the majority of people do.
Right. Yes, a referendum is going to give a much clearer outcome, providing that those people do come and make a decision and come and vote in that referendum. And
Yeah, but would you be willing to give people the opportunity to participate in plebiscites and referendums?
I wonder if people want to. Like, I would have to hear from people to find out if they want to, and then again, I'm going to have to balance it against costs, right? Do people? do people want to spend the money on that kind of stuff? If they do, then that's an important conversation to have. If they don't, and it's not going to be useful, then
we just continue with the representative democracy where you have the right to do all the decision.
yeah.
I see. So how can we find out? Is it important to you that?
It's important to me to definitely that we have representation, and if people decide that what they want to do is individually participate, then that's a different conversation, and we need to bring that forward for sure.